Hey guys, it's Mel. Welcome to my channel. This video is an unhaul video. This is my massive pile of books that I'm going to unhaul. So I'll start going through them in a moment, but I'm just going to say I apologize if there's anything whatsoever wrong with this video. I don't know whether it is focused properly. It looks okay in the viewfinder. I'm hoping that the volume is working. This is like the fourth time that I filmed this video and there was always something technical wrong, so really hope I don't have to do it again, and if there is anything wrong that's minor, I'm probably just going to leave it. So that is disclaimer number one. Disclaimer number two, or possibly just explanation, is that I have not been a person that has tended to unhaul books. I used to kind of have that little bit of a books are sacred thing, and so I really struggled to get rid of books even when I moved. So some of these books have actually moved country and state, interstate with me a couple of times, so they've really come a long way, but I have come to the realization over the years, and particularly watching BookTube, that realistically, if you're not going to read a book again, if you didn't like a book, then they're better off going to another home where they'll be appreciated and read and enjoyed. And also, the more books you get rid of, the more books you can add to your bookshelves. So, yay! Anyway, that's it for disclaimers for today. Let's get into the books. I'll probably go through them reasonably quickly because there's quite a few. So the first cab off the rank is Pompeii by Robert Harris. So this book is about the last sort of few days of Pompeii before Mount Vesuvius erupted and people died. So I remember really enjoying it. I remember thinking that it was reasonably historically accurate and interesting and exciting, and yeah, but it was quite a long time ago that I read it. It was bought secondhand originally, and I just honestly, I don't think that I'm going to reread it, so I'm sending it off to find somewhere else to live. Next is a book that I actually own 2 copies of. I don't know if anyone else does this, but if ever I'm in a secondhand bookstore, I often see a book or an author that I think that I'll really like, and I buy it, and then sometimes I get them home and discover that I already own it. And that's an example of this one. This one is an example of that. So that's Break No Bones by Kathy Reichs. So Kathy Reichs is the author that wrote the series of books about Temperance Brennan, which is what the television program Bones is based on. And the reason why that gets sort of confusing is because from everything that I've heard, the character of Temperance in the television series is quite like Kathy Reichs, the author, whereas the character in the books is quite different from the author. Just a little tidbit, side note. Yeah, so I actually haven't read this. I own 2 copies now, and I've still managed not to read it, so I think I'll have to put it on my TBR soon. But yeah, I really like Kathy Reichs. She is actually a forensic anthropologist, so as far as I know, her books are based in actual scientific fact, which is really interesting. So yeah, I think that someone else will really enjoy it as well. Next up, we have Winter's Tale by Mark Helprin. I don't really know how to describe this book. It's magical, fantastical realism. It's set in New York. It's about a cat burglar, essentially, who breaks into a house and meets a young woman who is dying of consumption, and they fall in love with each other, and yeah, it's about their love story from there. But there's a lot of, the book goes off on lots of different tangents. There's lots of random things going on. You get a lot of backstory before you kind of come to the meat of the story. I actually did not finish this book. My book club, the Book into Film Club, this was one of our books, so we read the book and we watched the movie. But I think everyone in the book club actually DNF'd this book, so I only got up to sort of there. Other people read a lot more than I did, and they all said that it continued being very confusing and tangential, and there was just all sorts of stuff that weren't really anything to do with the book. So I really don't think I'm going to give it another shot. I didn't particularly enjoy what I did read, so I'm going to send it to an op shop or something so that someone can take it and love it if that's what they do. I will say though that oddly enough we all really enjoyed the movie and liked it a lot more than the book, which is very unusual for me and for this particular group of people. So there you go. Next up, we have Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. Anyone that has been watching my videos for a while will know that I did actually put this on a to be read a couple of months ago, so I have reread it recently and I did actually quite enjoy it again. It had been about 20 years since I last read it, so it actually stood the test of time reasonably well. But it took me 20 years to get around to rereading it. I don't think that I'm probably going to reread it again anytime soon. If I do decide that I want to reread it at some point in the next 20 years, I can always go to the library, so I think this needs to find a new home as well. I do talk a lot more about the synopsis and the storyline and my thoughts about Interview with the Vampire in the video, the wrap-up, so I will link that below. So if you want to know what I thought of it or anything about it, then please go watch that. Next up is a little novella, Fly Away Peter by David Malouf, and I think this is a book that I got in a random book sale like 25 years ago, and even though it's apparently moved around the place with me, I've actually never ever read it, and I finally come to the realization that I obviously am not going to, so I will send it on. Now we have The Gates of Rome by Conn. Hello. I have a little helper, as usual. Hello. Now we have The Gates of Rome by Conn Iggulden, and that is in the Emperor series. I do remember reading some of these, not all of them, and I do remember enjoying them, but again, it was like 20 years ago or so, so this is another book that has travelled around the place with me, and again, I've never managed to reread it, so I think that it needs to find someone that might appreciate it more as well. This is her favourite way of sitting. Hello. Do you think that I could give you snuggles later? The next one is Bread and Chocolate by Philippa Gregory. This is an anthology of short stories of hers. I would love to tell you what it is about, but I actually don't remember what any of the stories are about, although I did read them and I enjoyed them. I believe they are sort of romance, love stories to do with food. And yeah, I did enjoy them, but another book that I bought this when I was in the UK and I read it then, which was about 15 years ago now, but yeah, I haven't reread it. So the next book is another did not finish, which is Snow Falling on Cedars by David Guterson. I have heard of this book and heard that it's a really great book, and I found it at a secondhand bookstore, so I thought, why not? And I purchased it, and I just couldn't really get into it. There's nothing in particular wrong with it. It seems like it's probably quite well written. It's a mystery story, which is something that I quite often quite enjoy. I don't know if maybe I wasn't in the mood for it. But either way, I I've tried it a couple of times now, and I just didn't particularly enjoy the first little bit, so I'm sending it on. Apparently I need a little break. Let's try that one again. Next up is the Twilight Watch by Sergei Lukyanenko. This is, I think, the second in a series of books, and it is quite a sort of dark, gritty take on the whole sort of vampire werewolf mythology. So there's sort of dual worlds in our actual world, and there's the vampire paranormal sort of world, and then there's our world. So I guess in a way sort of similar to the whole Shadowhunters sort of thing. I've seen some of that TV show, not read the books, so that may be an unfair comparison. I read the whole series of books, although I only own this one, and I fully intended to buy the other two when I first found this and read it and got really into them, but I just kind of never really did. This is another one that actually was purchased in London and was shipped back to Sydney and hence down to Tasmania, and I've never reread it, so again, I think it needs to go to another home. Moving straight on to The Potato Factory by Bryce Courtney. Those people who watch my December All the TBR list video will have seen that I put The Power of One, which is just here behind me in my to be read shelf. You will have seen that I put that on my to be read list because I did basically this whole sort of clean out of my bookshelves, which is where this Unhaul stack came from a while ago, and I just haven't managed to get around to filming yet, which is obviously what I'm doing now. Anyway, I decided that I really loved Bryce Courtney as an author when I was sort of 15, 16, 17, and so I might give him another shot. And I thought maybe I'd do the same thing with The Potato Factory, but I honestly just don't think that I will. Although I do recommend The Potato Factory, particularly if you're interested in any kind of modern history. So this is a story about Australia's colonisation. So yeah, it's interesting. It's well written. I just don't think I'm going to come back to it. So I'm going to send it on to someone else who will enjoy it and potentially get more out of it than I currently am. Another Kathy Reichs. This one is Deadly Decisions. So this is exactly the same thing as the last Kathy Reichs that I held up, and that is that I accidentally bought a second copy. So this one is going back to a bookstore. And now we have Empress Orchid by Anchee Min. This is another one of those books that has travelled around the place with me, and I did really enjoy it when I read it 15 or so years ago. It is sort of similar to Memoirs of a Geisha, if you know that book. So it is set in... so it's actually based on the story of China's last empress, which is really quite interesting, and like I said, it's quite a good book. Somewhat similar to Memoirs of a Geisha. I just find Memoirs of a Geisha to be a better book, to be honest, and I just don't think I'm going to reread this, so on it goes. And another did not finish, which is Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. This is another book that I'd heard a lot about and that I thought sounded really interesting. I really enjoyed the premise. So it is Mexican love story. It tells the story of Tita and Pedro, who fall in love with each other, but Pedro is married to Tita's sister, and so there's a lot of angst and there's the whole love triangle. Yeah, I don't know, I think I didn't like the writing style very much, so I just didn't finish it. I'm not necessarily saying don't read it, it just wasn't for me. So I DNF'd it and I'm going to send it on. This book is Dark Rose by Mike Lunnon-Wood. When I read this book, I quite enjoyed it. It is a story about terrorist cell who take over Ireland. So there's lots of action and spy sort of storyline, and yeah. So I read it again probably about 15 years ago or so. I did quite enjoy it then, although I'm not really sure that it's aged particularly well. So it is about a Islamic terrorist cell who takes over Ireland, and I feel in the current climate, that political climate that we're in the world, that it's probably not a great book to read for that reason. I don't think that it takes necessarily a right-wing vantage, but I think that it's definitely pro-Ireland and definitely anti-Islamic terrorism, and I'm not saying that we should be pro any kind of terrorism, but I just feel like it would potentially fan some not great flames, so I'm not going to recommend it. I wouldn't say that it's the best writing I had ever read. It doesn't do anything to try and deal with any of those issues either, so it's just telling a story. Yeah, so while I wouldn't recommend it necessarily, I don't necessarily think that it's entirely problematic, so I will put it back out into circulation, and who knows, someone might find it and love it. The next book is The Last Kabbalist of Lisbon by Richard Zimmler. This is a really well written, really well researched, really interesting book that I have read exactly one time, and don't imagine I'm going to reread it, even though, like I said, it is all of those things. I think that it's probably a relatively niche story. So it's set in Lisbon, and it is about a Jewish rabbi scholar in Lisbon, and it's set in 1506, so Judaism was very... Don't you hate it when you can't remember words? Judaism was not liked in Europe in that time, and so there were a lot of basically genocide and ethnic cleansings going on in that time and place. So it is a story that is fraught with a lot of really hardcore topics, and I definitely wouldn't recommend it if you don't want to read a book about genocide or about people facing that sort of thing, ethnic cleansing, religious cleansing, all of that sort of stuff. But as I said, I think that it's really interesting. I'm not really sure who I would recommend this to, although I do think that my father would actually really enjoy it. So I'm contemplating just giving it straight to him. But yeah, needless to say, I am not hanging on to it. So that was The Last Kabbalist of Lisbon by Richard Zimmler. Next up we have The Stone of Light, which is a series, and The Wise Woman is this book, and it's by Christian Jack. Christian Jack writes probably a lot of things, but this particular series that he has written is about ancient Egyptian kings and pharaohs and so society and culture, and yeah, so they're very interesting. And I don't actually know that much about Egyptian history, so I'm not sure how accurate they are, but I did find them really interesting. I do like a historical / myth retelling, so if you like that kind of thing, I definitely recommend it. But this is yet another one that I just have not got around to picking back up again, and I've owned it for probably about, again, 20 years or so, and in all that time haven't reread it, so I think it needs a new home also. Another book that I bought while I was in England that has moved around the world and is now being sent on, and that is Passing Under Heaven by Justin Hill. This is another book that is really interesting and quite well written, and takes an interesting perspective, so I would definitely recommend it. I wouldn't say that it was a 5-star book. I think it's probably more like a 3.5 star, but it was interesting and well written. I did enjoy it, but like I said, I've just never gotten around to rereading it, so I'm not going to hang on to it. It can go to someone that might love it a bit more. It is set in the Tang dynasty. It is about the daughter of one of the concubines of the emperor. So, yeah, really interesting, well worth a look at. This next book is Plain Truth by Jodi Picoult, and I actually purchased this and read this reasonably recently in the last year or so. I did quite enjoy it. I've quite enjoyed most Jodi Picoult books. It is about a young woman who is Amish, and she is pregnant and she has a baby, and she basically acts like she didn't have a baby. The baby dies and she is arrested for killing the baby, but she essentially doesn't remember having a baby. She keeps denying that she ever had a baby, let alone killed it. Yeah, so it's about her trial and about the situation that she finds herself in, about an Amish family and community who have to come under laws that they don't recognise. So yeah, like I said, it's quite good, it's quite interesting. I did really enjoy it, but I honestly don't think I'm going to reread it, at least not anytime soon. I'm not saying I never would, but I just think that someone else might want to read it, so I'm sending it back out. And now we have one of my favourite books when I was about 14 years old, and it is a Degrassi book, and it is Melanie, which is, you may have guessed, is my name. I did actually also really like this character. It's not just that she has my name. So I think that they redid Degrassi High, or possibly Degrassi Junior High, about 10 years ago or so now, and modernised it somewhat. I didn't watch that series. I watched the original. There was Degrassi Kids in the 80s that ran very briefly, and then there was Degrassi Junior High, and then there was Degrassi High, and I loved this show. And so I used to watch it, and I used to really love it. They brought out a bunch of different books based on the various different characters. This one is Melanie, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. But I could put it in with my big box of children's books, but I don't know how well it's dated, so I'm just going to send it out into the world and see if anyone gets nostalgic. Another Bryce Courtney. This one is Jessica. Basically exactly the same thing as I said about the last couple of Bryce Courtneys. I may try and read this before I send it on to wherever I end up sending these books, but I'm not certain that I will. This one, I actually don't remember. I read it like 20 years ago, and I don't really remember. I did used to love Bryce Courtney, but I've sort of, I wouldn't say fallen out of love with him, or his writing, but I've just sort of, they've sort of just fallen to the wayside. So, alright, so the next book is actually a self-help book which a friend of mine gave me, and I apologise to the person if they're watching this video. I don't remember who it was. It's Unashamed by Christine Kane, and it's essentially a little bit of a book about how you don't have to feel shame, and that you know, your life is your life and people make mistakes, and that shame is a really problematic emotion. It's probably a fantastic self-help book. I just don't do self-help books. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them. I am not saying that people shouldn't get something out of them. I'm sure that they help a lot of people. I just am not a person that's ever gravitated towards self-help books. I've never found them particularly helpful. So I just honestly think that there's probably someone out in the universe who would get something out of this that I have not gotten out of this, or to be honest, to this moment, any other self-help book. So I'm going to send it out into the universe and see what happens. I now have 4 books to show you that I sort of feel like need to have their own caveat, and that is that they're all classics, and I feel like I ought to want to own them, but I just don't want to own them. I don't think that I will read them. I don't think that I will enjoy them. I feel like they're the kind of thing that if I was studying English literature, they'd be a great thing to have, but I'm not. So, and they are The Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, Dante's Divine Comedy 1, Hell, Dante's Divine Comedy 2, Purgatory, and Dante's Divine Comedy 3, Paradise. The next 3 books are some more classics, but I'm not actually unhauling them because I don't want them anymore. I'm unhauling them because I've decided that it's time for an upgrade. So these are all books that were bought secondhand, that have been owned by me for a long time, and they were kind of beaten up, and I want a nice new pretty one, so that's what I'm going to do. The first of those is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Villette by Charlotte Bronte, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I also own The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. I didn't get it off the bookshelf when I originally made the pile of unhauled books because it's not in as bad a condition as this one actually is. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's not in great condition, so I think it might get added to the list of books I will unhaul and then buy new pretty versions of. And my last 3 books are actually books that my partner Rowan is unhauling rather than myself, but I'm going to show them to you anyway. And that is Flight of the Old Dog by Dale Brown, Chains of Command by Dale Brown, and Gangland, Volumes 1 and 2, Omnibus Edition by James Morton. I don't know anything about these 3 books. I don't feel particularly inclined to read any of these books, so I will unhaul them as well, or we will, I guess, unhaul them as well. If you have read any of these books, I'd love to know what you thought of them. I'd love to know if there are any books that you have decided after a long time to unhaul, or even some books that you are getting rid of even though you did like them but you're just probably not going to reread them. So please comment in the description. Please comment below, you know what to do. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to my channel, and I will see you next time.